For the past 23 years, my wife, 39F, and I, 40M, have shared a life together, built on the foundation of being high school sweethearts. We have 3 beautiful daughters, aged 11, 13, and 15. For 17 years, we had a seemingly happy and stable marriage. But recently everything came crashing down. My wife confessed to having an affair for at least the past 4 years, driven by boredom, and has left me for weeks. Now she wants to come back. The situation is far more complicated and distressing than I ever anticipated. 3 days ago, my wife came home from work, sobbing and barely able to speak. She hastily packed an overnight bag and left, saying she needed to go to work. Our eldest daughter was home at the time, so that's the only reason I'm aware of what happened. Since then, we've had no contact with her. My attempts to reach her through calls and texts have gone unanswered. I reached out to her parents, who informed me that she's staying with them, urging me to be patient and understanding. However, when I contacted her brother, sister, and a close colleague, they claimed to know nothing about her whereabouts. The following day, I called the police, as I hadn't heard from my wife and was extremely concerned. After a wellness check, I discovered something that changed everything. My wife had been involved in an affair for at least 2 years, possibly longer. Tragically, the other man passed away from a heart attack. It seems that my wife's family, especially her sister and mother, were aware of this and had been covering for her. Yet, my wife has not reached out to me or the children since then. I've been left alone to explain to our daughters why their mother is absent. I've told them that she's with her parents, but they believe we had a heated argument and are divorcing, which is far from the truth. It feels like my world is falling apart, and I'm left in limbo, trying to hold everything together for the sake of my children. The pain, confusion, and betrayal I feel are overwhelming, and I can't help but think about how everything we built together now seems like it was a lie. The worst part is the uncertainty. I don't know where she is, why she left, or what her next move will be. It's excruciating not knowing anything, and I'm struggling to make sense of it all. Why would she do this to our family after everything we've shared? Date 1. I finally received some clarity, but it has only added to the emotional weight of the situation. My wife's affair lasted longer than I initially thought, and it appears she had known the other man for a significant amount of time. His sudden death was a shock, and it seems to have triggered a series of events that led to her disappearance. Despite everything, I am trying to focus on the present, taking care of my 3 daughters and maintaining some normalcy. But it's becoming increasingly difficult to hide the truth from them, and I'm struggling with a constant emotional roller coaster. I feel rage, sadness, confusion, and emptiness all at once. Some days, it feels like I can't breathe under the weight of this betrayal. Day 2. The advice and support from others have been a lifeline. I've reached out to 2 attorneys to discuss my options, and I've been looking into therapy. The emotional toll has been immense. I can't seem to stop the spiral of thoughts that keep me up at night. Rage, despair, and helplessness consume me, and I feel lost in this new reality. In many ways, I feel like a zombie going through the motions. It's hard to find motivation for anything, including taking care of myself. I've always been in good shape, but now I just feel numb. The worst part is the grief. Not just for the betrayal, but for the loss of the life I thought we had built together. She was my everything, my best friend, my partner. And now it feels like she's gone. I'm also struggling with how to deal with my daughters. They've been trying to take care of me, but they're just kids. They shouldn't have to shoulder this burden. But every day it feels like I'm on the edge, and I don't know how to keep going. I'm reaching out here because I'm desperate for advice. How did you cope with this kind of pain? How do you make sense of such betrayal? How do you survive the emptiness and silence that comes with the loss of someone you loved for so long? Any guidance would be appreciated. Thank you for listening. Date 3. I apologize if I'm not very experienced on Reddit. It's only been just over a week since the day everything changed for me. Since then, I've uncovered some difficult truths. My wife's affair lasted more than 4 years. While I don't have a precise timeline, it's clear that what started as an emotional connection eventually turned physical. The impact of the pandemic and lockdowns may have played a role, though I may never fully understand the full picture. Yesterday, my in-laws unexpectedly came to visit their grandchildren. Since the revelation of the affair, my wife has been staying with them, which feels completely surreal. They spent a brief 15 minutes with the girls before requesting a private conversation with me. I won't go into too much detail about that conversation, but I will say it was long and intense. In that discussion, my wife expressed that she wanted to return home, but was afraid of facing the consequences of her actions. She couldn't confront her past. Her parents did everything in their power to convince me to forgive her and keep the marriage intact. They wanted her to leave their home, but it was clear they were also deeply ashamed and humiliated by the situation. The conversation was civil and polite, but I made it clear that I wasn't sure what my future held. I told them that I was leaning towards divorce, though I acknowledged that I feared I'd never truly understand the full extent of what had happened. I've made it clear to my wife that I'm only willing to consider a future with her if she sits down with me, looks me in the eyes, and tells me the entire truth of her affair, from beginning to end, without hesitation or evasion. I need to hear it all, especially after 17 years of marriage, 3 children, and countless memories built together. I want her to take responsibility, apologize to me, and then, if possible, speak to our children directly and explain herself to them. They deserve that, as they already know more than they should. I'm trying to figure out what's best for my girls during this time. I don't know if I'm doing this right, but I believe it's important to give them the chance to see that I've tried to handle this like an adult. I can't legally stop my wife from coming home. The attorney made that very clear. So, even though I'm not ready to live with her yet, I know she will inevitably return. To be honest, I'm trying to buy myself some time, both for my emotional well-being and to figure out the best course of action. The state has a 90-day waiting period for divorce, so that's something to consider. My wife has been texting me profusely, apologizing and expressing deep regret, but I'm still not sure what the truth is. How should I navigate this? Was my request too much to ask? Ultimately, I know my wife will likely return soon, and I'm trying to prepare myself for that. I am committed to building a future for my children, and whatever that may look like, I'll do what's best for them and for me. Date 4. I apologize for the long post, but I really needed to get this out there. Yesterday, my wife returned home. It wasn't the reunion I'd imagined. Normally, when she walks through the door, there's warmth, hugs, and kisses, but this time there was nothing but awkward tension. She approached me and tried to hug me, but I turned away. It felt as though nothing had happened, but I couldn't pretend. After some time, I told her I needed to know the truth. She remained quiet for a long while before finally telling me that she wasn't ready to share everything. It was the same answer she had given me during our earlier phone conversation. She wasn't ready. But I made it clear that if she wanted to return home, I needed her to be honest with me about her affair, the whole truth with no lies. That was the one condition. It's strange to think about, but when she stood there in front of me, her expression changed. She had no idea I knew the full extent of her affair. She just stared at the floor, silent, her body language stiff. I expected an emotional outburst, maybe even an apology or some kind of denial, but instead, there was nothing but a calm acknowledgement. Her response was unexpected. Just a somber, "Okay, let's talk this out." For 5 minutes, we stood in silence, neither of us knowing what to say. I had prepared myself for every possible reaction, except for this one. I had read all the advice people offered, made notes, and thought I was ready for anything. But this, it was beyond anything I could have expected. Finally, I broke the silence. I told her what I knew about her affair, how she met the other man, the involvement of her sister, and the timeline. It was painful, but I had to say it. She didn't say a word. She just looked down. And that's when I felt a surge of anger. But I kept it together, tried to stay composed, and kept everything in perspective. I don't know what will come of this. I'm still processing everything. But I do know one thing. I need to move forward for my girls and for myself. No matter how this ends, I will focus on what's best for them. The air was thick with tension. I stood there, struggling to contain the storm brewing inside me. I refused to raise my voice or let profanity slip. I had to hold myself together. Eventually, the anger ebbed away, replaced by an overwhelming sadness. The clarity was almost suffocating. I asked her gently, with a quiet sadness, what had I done to make her leave? Had I ever truly been loved by her? Was it all a mistake? I waited for an answer, but none came. She stood motionless, her head lowered in silence. No tears, no apologies, no explanation. Nothing at all. That emptiness was more painful than any outburst or confrontation. It cut deeper than any words could. I was left standing there, staring at her, unable to move, unable to speak. The silence between us felt like a suffocating void. But as if things weren't already unbearable, the girls overheard the whole exchange. The weight of the moment grew heavier with each passing second. I had been trying so hard over the past few weeks to put the girls first. I focused on their needs, on their well-being, but in that moment I felt like I was failing them. My oldest daughter, holding back so much anger, stormed downstairs in a fury. She screamed, a burst of emotion I couldn't control. My wife fled to the bedroom, locking herself away. I was left standing there, unable to comfort her, to explain. The night was filled with the sound of my wife sobbing, and only our youngest daughter, ever the peacemaker, tried to console her. The others distanced themselves, not knowing how to respond to the pain that hung thick in the air. Felt like a fool. I thought she would beg for forgiveness, that she would confess the truth, but she didn't. Instead, I was left wondering if I ever really mattered to her, or if I was just a fleeting chapter in her life. This woman, who once drove across town to return the extra change at a market, didn't value me. I wondered if I had ever been worth it to her. The next few days at home were a strange sort of normal, a facade we all tried to uphold. I made efforts to keep things calm, to keep my emotions in check for the girls' sake, but it felt impossible. Divorce seemed inevitable, and I struggled with the reality of it. How could I navigate this when everything around me felt like a house of cards? Then, as if nothing had happened, my wife returned home one Friday evening. I had been doing my best to keep my distance, to keep conversations brief and neutral, but tonight was different. She was waiting for me in the kitchen. I tried to ignore her, to continue my quiet detachment, but she gently took my hand and asked if I was going to treat her this way. The question hung in the air, a heavy reminder of the unresolved pain between us. For the first time since everything had shattered, she was ready to talk about her affair. I had been holding back, trying to maintain control, but in that moment everything spilled out. My hurt, my anger, my betrayal. I let it all pour out, words coming in waves, some louder than others. I didn't care how it sounded anymore. I needed her to understand the depth of my pain, how it had shattered me. I cried, I yelled, and in the midst of it all, I felt a strange satisfaction when she too began to cry. I had been waiting for this moment, the moment where she showed any sign of remorse. She apologized. Over and over, in between sobs, her words came out in broken whispers. But even then it felt empty. I couldn't accept her apologies. Not now, not after everything. I left the kitchen before she could say anything else, before the raw emotions could settle into something more dangerous. She left shortly after, heading to her sister's house. The girls returned home, and I could see the confusion on their faces. They knew something was wrong. But I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. I didn't want to shatter their worlds, especially not the youngest, who had been making so much progress. My oldest, too, was already angry enough. I didn't want to add fuel to her fire, to turn her hurt into something even more unbearable. Hate this. I hate every moment of it. I hate the way it's all unfolding, the way I've allowed her to affect me, the way I've let it all build up until I couldn't hold it in any longer. But what's next? What do I do from here? How do I move forward when everything feels so broken, so irreparably damaged? I wish I could turn back time. I wish I hadn't let it all come to this point. But now, all I can do is brace myself for whatever comes next, even if it feels like I'm drowning in the aftermath. It seems that in retrospect, I should have simply ignored my wife and walked past her when she attempted to confront me. Looking back now, I'm unsure of what she was trying to do. It almost feels as if she was attempting to bring up her affair but didn't know how to approach it. Of course, she didn't get very far, as I blew up at her in anger. Now, I find myself genuinely concerned for her well-being. Despite everything that has happened, I don't want her to suffer. She may have done wrong, but she's still a person and the mother of my children. My heart feels heavy with disappointment, and I can't help but regret the way things have unfolded. I also had a heated argument with my brother over the phone, and I know I need to find a way to begin fresh on Monday. I know I'm only human, and while venting to her may have felt cathartic at the moment, I now feel an overwhelming sense of regret. I'm unsure if I should text her or continue ignoring her. I'm a wreck, emotionally drained, but I appreciate all of you listening and offering your support. We've started therapy as a family, which is a small step in the right direction amidst all the turmoil, but it's been incredibly difficult. Truly, it's been one of the hardest periods of my life. It's been a tough week. I've been out of touch with most people because I was hoping to take a break from the internet. Yet, this week has been an emotional regression for me. My wife has been incredibly apologetic, crying and trying to reach out to me constantly. She's been knocking on my door at night, wanting to talk. I've spoken to her when I felt up to it, but I've mostly kept my distance. On Wednesday night, I finally lost my temper and told her to stop bothering me. Then last night everything came crashing down. My soon-to-be ex-wife returned home a little over a month ago, and now we've started this uncomfortable routine of cohabitation. She came to me after the kids had gone to bed, asking to speak in private. I agreed, and we ended up sitting in the car for nearly 3 hours while she opened up to me. She shared the full details of everything, and I just stayed up all night listening to her cry. I cried too, but at the same time I was overwhelmed with anger, struggling to keep my composure. I had to fight the urge to scream at her, to shout every hurtful thing that came to mind. My wife told me how her affair began, explaining that her sister had introduced her to the affair partner about 5 years ago. Initially, there was no romantic intention, but he was higher up in the company she worked for. She convinced him that the change in her career was unrelated to the affair, although it's clear now that it was part of her motivation. Once they began working together, their relationship turned flirtatious, and eventually, things became physical. She initially wanted to confess everything to me, but chose to keep it hidden. She told me that she severed contact with the affair partner for a time, but as soon as the restrictions lifted, he reached out again, and they resumed their affair. This affair continued for years, with her claiming she tried to end it several times but kept returning to him. She provided me with long handwritten notes detailing everything, and it was clear that much of it had been lies. She had been covering up her secret life, and hearing it all was gut-wrenching. The most painful part was hearing that she had fallen in love with him, that she fantasized about leaving everything behind, including me and our family. She admitted that the excitement of the affair was too powerful to resist, and it all felt like a betrayal of everything we had shared. I tried to remain composed, but I couldn't help but lash out. I mocked her affair partner for having several girlfriends, and she seemed offended by that. In the moment, I couldn't hold back all the things I wanted to say. One thought that crossed my mind was asking her who she would choose if it came down to me or him. She hesitated and then said she would choose me. But I didn't believe her. At that point, I knew our marriage was over, and I told her as much. She cried, and we sat there in silence for a while, but I knew it was time to end it. After all the pain, I told her that I would always love her, but it was time to move on. I kissed her forehead and left the car. I'm not sure what comes next, whether I'll talk to my attorney or try to work things out for the sake of the children. But I know one thing. I can't continue living in this emotional turmoil. Too much. Despite everything, I still care for her, but the hurt is too deep. It's hard to believe that the woman I loved could betray me for years out of boredom, without any real issues in our relationship. It almost makes it feel worse, knowing that it was just for the thrill of it.